The Galactic Council never expected the humans to walk away. For decades, they had been negotiating, debating, and at times condescending. Humanity was the last major species to join the interstellar stage, and to the Council, they were little more than an unpredictable variable in an otherwise orderly galaxy. Wars had been waged and settled, treaties signed and broken, but through it all, the Council believed in one truth: diplomacy always won in the end. So when tensions flared between humanity and the dominion, a vast empire of warlike species that saw negotiation as a sign of weakness, the Council did what it always did. They called for peace talks. They invited humanity to the table, assuming they would fall in line, that they would agree to terms, compromise, and move on. It had worked before, time and time again. But the humans didn't sit down. They stood. Across the chamber, representatives from the older races, those who had been part of the Council for centuries, exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. The Council chamber was a place of words, not silence. Yet there they stood, humanity's delegation, staring at their so-called allies with an expression that sent a chill through the room. It wasn't anger. It wasn't desperation. It was something far worse. Resolve. The lead negotiator, a hardened diplomat who had seen the best and worst of galactic politics, placed both hands on the table, leaning forward just enough for the weight of their presence to be felt. When they finally spoke, their voice was calm, controlled. "We came here to negotiate in good faith," they said. But good faith requires honesty. The Council remained quiet. The Dominion's delegation, seated smugly at the opposite end of the hall, barely hid their amusement. They had made their demands clear: territory, resources, the dismantling of human defenses along the border. It was an ultimatum, dressed in the language of diplomacy. The kind of deal the Council always pushed through, using the weight of galactic law and tradition. But the humans had seen through it. "You call this peace?" the human continued. "We call it surrender." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The Dominion's representatives grinned, their sharp teeth glinting under the artificial lights. To them, this was nothing more than posturing, one last attempt to bargain before inevitable submission. The human diplomat straightened. "We've listened. We've compromised. And we've learned." Their gaze swept across the room, landing on each race that had counseled restraint, urged patience, promised protection that never came. "But if this is what passes for peace in your council..." The air seemed to thin. Somewhere in the chamber, a counselor gasped. The Dominion's leader blinked, their amusement flickering into something else, something uncertain. Without another word, the humans turned and walked out. The doors slammed shut behind them, and for the first time in its long history, the Galactic Council realized it had made a mistake. A terrible, irreversible mistake. The silence that followed was heavier than the Council had ever known. For a long moment, no one spoke. No one dared to move. The humans were gone, their footsteps still echoing in the vast chamber, but their presence lingered like a shadow stretching over every delegate in the room. Even the Dominion's warlords, always so quick to sneer, remained still, their expressions unreadable. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The humans were meant to concede, to bend under the weight of tradition and political pressure. The Council had believed that, like every other species before them, they would see reason. That they would accept compromise, however bitter, because the alternative war was unthinkable. But the humans had walked away. An elder counselor, their robes weighed down with metals from long-forgotten treaties, cleared their throat. "They will return," they said, their voice unsteady but firm. "They are emotional, impulsive. Give them time to reconsider." No one answered, because deep down, they all knew the truth. Humanity had not stormed out in anger. There had been no shouts, no threats, no last-minute pleas. What the Council had witnessed was something else entirely. A cold, deliberate decision. A choice. A low chuckle broke the uneasy quiet. It came from the Dominion side of the chamber. One of their high commanders leaned back in their seat, claws tapping lazily against the armrest. "So that's it," they mused. "They're finished with the game?" Their sharp-toothed grin returned, but there was something forced about it. "Good. Let them go." They gestured around at the rest of the council. "What are you all so afraid of? They have no allies, no fleets worth mentioning, no history of conquest. If they refuse peace, let them suffer the cost of war alone." The elder counselor's hands tightened into fists, hidden beneath the table. "You misunderstand," they said quietly. "This is not relief you should be feeling." The Dominion commander scoffed. "And why not?" The counselor finally looked up. Their aged, weary eyes swept across the chamber, taking in the faces of those who still didn't see it, who still didn't understand. Because humanity does not bluff. The words settled over the room like a heavy fog. And for the first time, uncertainty flickered in the Dominion's ranks. For centuries, the Council had overlooked the humans' history, dismissing their struggles as insignificant. They had studied humanity's wars, their alliances, their revolutions, and had drawn the same conclusion every time: an aggressive but ultimately reasonable species. One that could be controlled, guided, managed. But now, cracks had formed in that assumption. The humans had not stormed out in a fit of anger. They had walked away with the calm certainty of a people who had already made their decision. The galaxy is old, far older than we can imagine. Countless empires have risen and crumbled into dust long before Earth's first fire was lit. Ancient species have explored the stars, claimed worlds, and waged wars so devastating they became myths even among their own kind. Yet, in all that time, in all those endless cycles of power and ruin, a fear of something inevitable, something unknown. Us. They don't talk about it. Not openly. Not where records could be found or where younger species might overhear. But in the deep, hidden places of the universe, in whispered conversations between those who have seen too much, the fear lingers. Not of Earth as it is now, not of the humans still stumbling their way into the stars, but of what we could become. There are those who claim to know why. A few rogue scholars, the kind who dig too deep and live too short, speak of an event long ago, before humans ever took their first breath. They say the oldest species, the ones who had already mapped the stars before Earth, had cooled and countered something. Something that left them shaken in a way no war, no disaster, no extinction-level event ever had. A memory so terrible that, even now, they refuse to set foot anywhere near our little blue planet. Of course, to the rest of the galaxy, humans are nothing more than an anomaly. A young, reckless species still too small to matter. We fight among ourselves. We throw rockets into the sky like children skipping stones across a pond. The universe watches with mild curiosity, but nothing more. At least, not openly. But then something changed. It started with a single ship. A lone trader, passing too close to the Sol system. A routine trip, one of thousands just like it. But when that ship returned, its captain refused to speak of what they had seen. The logs were wiped, the crew disappeared, and the trading routes around Earth grew suspiciously quiet. That was only the beginning. More ships came. Explorers. Scientists. Observers sent by the oldest races, watching from a safe distance, always careful, never to interfere. And one by one, they left in silence. No reports. No explanations. Just the same, unsettling absence of words. And then, one day, the silence broke. A distress signal. Weak, fragmented, barely more than a whisper across the void. It came from the edge of our solar system, from a ship that should not have been there. A ship belonging to a species so old they had seen civilizations fall before humanity had even learned to walk upright. A species that did not make mistakes. But the message was clear. The voice, trembling. We were wrong. It's not them we should fear. It's what's waiting for them. Then nothing. The signal cut. The ship was gone. And the galaxy, for the first time in a very, very long time, held its breath. The signal had been cut, but the message remained. It echoed through hidden channels, passed in hushed conversations between those who understood its weight. The oldest races, the ones who had seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations, reacted first. Quietly, without announcement, their ships pulled away from human space, retreating like the tide before a coming storm. Trade routes were abandoned. Long-standing agreements were severed without explanation. Space that had once been patrolled by alien vessels now lay empty, silent. But not everyone could afford to ignore the warning. On a cold research station orbiting a barren moon at the edge of the system, a single human outpost continued listening. They had intercepted the message, what little there was of it, and even though the official stance was to dismiss it as irrelevant, those who worked in the shadows knew better. It wasn't just paranoia. Something was happening. Something the rest of the galaxy was too afraid to name. Among them was a man who had spent his life chasing the unknown. He wasn't a soldier, not an ambassador, not anyone important. Just a scientist, one of many assigned to catalog what scraps of alien knowledge trickled into human hands. His work was supposed to be routine, buried under layers of bureaucracy. But now, the routine had shattered. He had played the message back so many times, the words were burned into his thoughts. We were wrong. It's not them we should fear. It's what's waiting for them. What did that mean? What could possibly make the most advanced species in the galaxy, beings that had survived wars beyond human comprehension, so afraid? No answers came. Only silence. Then, the disappearances began. It started small. A missing survey drone, lost in the asteroid belt. A deep space probe, its signal vanishing without explanation. But then, a ship, a full crew of trained researchers went dark. No distress signal. No wreckage. Just gone. The station's officials scrambled for explanations. Equipment failure, navigation errors, space debris. But those were excuses, and everyone knew it. The old races had seen something in humanity's future, something they weren't willing to face. And now, whatever it was getting closer. But closer to what? Earth? Humanity itself? Or was it already here, waiting for them to notice? He couldn't let it go. He knew he should. But curiosity is a stubborn fire, and his had been burning for too long. So he made a choice. One that could not be undone. He bypassed protocols, accessed files buried deeper than they had any right to be. Old transmissions, incomplete data from ships that had come too close to something they shouldn't have. What he found made his breath catch in his throat. A pattern. A shadow, moving just beyond human perception. It had been there for years, watching, waiting. And then his screen flickered. A new message appeared. No source. No signal. Just words. You are not supposed to see this. Then everything went black. Darkness swallowed the screen. The station's lights flickered, casting long, shifting shadows across the room. For a moment, silence pressed in like a living thing, thick and suffocating. Then, a soft hum returned to the machines, and the emergency lights bathed the lab in a dim red glow. His pulse pounded in his ears. He knew he should step away, call security, report the breach. But his hand stayed frozen above the console. The message was gone, wiped clean as if it had never been there. No trace in the logs, no record of an incoming transmission. But he had seen it. Someone was watching. And they had made sure he knew it. A chime broke the silence. His personal comm. An encrypted line. He hesitated. No one outside the station had access to this channel. No one should be calling him, especially not now. The message was simple. Leave it alone. His breath caught. He stood, pushing away from the console as if distance could erase what had just happened. He wasn't paranoid, not yet, but this wasn't a coincidence. Someone had gone to great lengths to bury the truth. And he had just dug too deep. Across the station, others were beginning to notice the cracks. The lead communications officer had intercepted bursts of static on secured channels, distortions in the background of routine messages, something coded, hidden beneath the ordinary noise. At first, she dismissed it as interference, the kind that came with aging equipment and bad signal relays. But then the distortions started forming patterns, irregular at first, then precise. Deliberate. Elsewhere, a technician tasked with monitoring deep space activity flagged a series of anomalies. Ships were still disappearing, but not randomly. Their last known locations formed a shape, a spiral pattern expanding outward like ripples in water. And at the center of it all, Earth. None of them spoke of their findings. Not yet. But tension ran through the station like a live wire, an unspoken certainty that something was very, very wrong. Then, the first confirmed distress signal came through. A mining vessel drifting far beyond human-occupied space. The crew's voices were panicked, fragmented, words cutting in and out. Not alone. Watching us. No way out. Then, a noise. Not static. Not a malfunction. Something else. Something listening. Then silence. The station's emergency protocols kicked in. Data was locked down. Communications filtered. Officials assured everyone it was an accident, that there was nothing to be concerned about. But the people who worked in the shadows, the ones who had seen too much, knew better. They weren't looking at a simple anomaly anymore. This wasn't just fear or superstition passed down by ancient species. This was real. And whatever it was getting closer. And then, without warning, the station's power failed. Not just the lights. Not just the computers. Everything. In the sudden, absolute darkness, a single message scrolled across every screen in the station, glowing in eerie, pale blue. You should not be here. The station remained in complete darkness. No emergency backups, no flickering screens, nothing. Just the cold, suffocating silence. Then, a sound soft at first, almost imperceptible. A faint, rhythmic tapping. Not mechanical. Not a system rebooting. Something else. Someone or something was here. He held his breath, straining to listen. The tapping was slow, deliberate, moving along the outer hull. Then it stopped. A sharp, high-pitched tone rang out through the darkness, an unnatural frequency that set his teeth on edge. It was inside the station now. The air felt heavier, charged with something unseen. His skin prickled. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but where? The doors were dead, the corridors just as dark. He reached for his personal comm, but the screen remained blank, lifeless in his grip. Then, a whisper. Not from the comma. Not from the speakers. You were warned. His breath hitched. It had no source, no direction. The voice was just there, like a thought slipping into his mind. And he wasn't the only one hearing it. Across the station, in every sealed-off room, every locked-down corridor, people were frozen in place, their heartbeats hammering against their ribs. Scientists, engineers, security personnel, all hearing the same impossible voice. You should not be here. Then, a sudden shift. The gravity flickered, an unnatural pull dragging everything ever so slightly sideways before stabilizing again. The structure groaned under the strain, metal bending, protesting. And then, the worst part. The station's main viewport, the one that overlooked the void, lit up. Not from any external lights. Not from human technology. Something outside was glowing. A shape barely visible against the blackness of space. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't anything recognizable. It was vast, stretching beyond the limits of the station's sensors, shifting like it wasn't entirely bound by normal dimensions. And it was watching. He could feel it. A pressure inside his mind, a presence that wasn't human, wasn't alien, wasn't anything that belonged in this universe. Something ancient. Something waiting. He stumbled backward, his breath coming too fast, too shallow. This wasn't supposed to happen. They weren't supposed to find anything. But maybe they hadn't found it. Maybe it had been waiting for them. And now that they had come too close, there was no turning back. A deep, resonant sound vibrated through the station, shaking the walls, rattling the air itself. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a message. It was a door opening. And something was stepping through. The station trembled as the sound deepened, vibrating through every surface, every molecule of air. It wasn't just a noise, it was a presence, something vast pressing against reality itself. The glow outside the viewport intensified, shifting in unnatural ways, folding in on itself like space was bending around it. It wasn't moving closer. It didn't have to. It was already here, in ways the human mind wasn't meant to understand. Then, the alarms blared. Emergency lights flickered to life, a weak and failing red glow barely cutting through the heavy darkness. But something was wrong. And yet, the glow outside the station, the impossible presence in the void, hadn't moved. It hadn't reached for them. It hadn't attacked. Because it didn't need to. The silence of deep space was broken by the low hum of thrusters and the distant crackle of a radio transmission. A battered ship, its hull patched with scavenged metal, drifted through the wreckage of a forgotten battle. This was the Razorback, and it wasn't here by accident. It was hunting. Inside the dimly lit cockpit, a pair of hands moved quickly over the controls, adjusting thrusters with practiced ease. The pilot narrowed their eyes at the display, scanning for anything worth salvaging. Out here, in the dead zones between star systems, only the bold or the desperate dared to pick the bones of fallen warships. The crew of the Razorback were both. A voice crackled over the comms. "I've got something. Big." That was enough to set everyone in motion. Seats creaked, boots thudded against metal grates, and within seconds, the salvage team was suited up and ready. They weren't soldiers. They weren't even criminals. They were scrap runners, humans doing what they did best, finding value in what others left behind. As the airlock hissed open, the void of space stretched before them, endless and indifferent. The wreckage ahead was massive, the remains of a Xilith dreadnought. A prize like this could feed their families for a year if they survived long enough to claim it. Moving carefully, the team pushed off into the debris field, their suit lights flickering against twisted metal. The ship was dead, but space had a way of hiding things. Sometimes, scavengers weren't alone. A warning flashed across the pilot's HUD. Motion detected. Something was moving in the wreckage. The warning blinked again. Motion detected. For a long second, no one spoke. The pilot's fingers hovered over the thruster controls, ready to yank the ship away if anything came lunging from the dark. But nothing did. Just the wreckage, silent and broken, drifting through the void like a graveyard. "Could be debris shifting," someone said over comms, though their voice was tight with doubt. "Or something else," another muttered. The salvage team floated forward, threading carefully through twisted beams and shattered hull plating. Their suit lights cast long, flickering shadows, making every floating scrap look like it might move. One of them reached out, gripping the side of a jagged opening in the wreck. The metal was scorched, torn apart by weapons fire. This ship hadn't just been abandoned, it had been killed. The pilot kept watch from the Razorback, eyes flicking between sensor readouts and the ghostly shapes of their team moving in the distance. A ship this size belonged to the Xilith, a reptilian species that ruled this sector with brutal efficiency. If they were lucky, this wreck had been stripped clean long ago. If they weren't, there might still be something lurking inside. The first scavenger through the breach switched on a helmet light, sweeping it through the dark corridor. Wires and tubing hung from the ceiling like frozen vines. Every surface was pockmarked with scorch marks. Close quarters fight. That meant people or something like them had been here when the ship went down. "See anything?" the pilot asked, keeping their voice steady. "Nothing but wreckage," came the reply. "Hold on, wait." A pause. Then a sharp breath. "There's bodies." Silence. They all knew what that meant. Ships like this didn't leave bodies behind unless something had gone terribly wrong. Most Xilith vessels had self-destruct protocols. No survivors. No evidence. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't followed protocol. One of the scavengers nudged a floating corpse. The Xilith warrior was still in full battle armor, its chest plate caved in from a force powerful enough to break bone. But there was something else. The body had been torn open, deep gashes running across its torso. Not from shrapnel. Not from gunfire. Something else had done this. The radio crackled again. I don't like this. We should grab what we can and... A noise. Faint, but unmistakable. A slow, scraping sound from deeper inside the wreck. The team went still. The pilot held their breath, fingers tightening around the controls. Then another sound. Closer this time. A rustling, shifting noise, like something moving through the corridors, disturbed by their presence. One of the scavengers raised a hand, signaling retreat. But before they could move, the emergency lights of the Exila ship flickered just once, like a dying heartbeat. Then a voice, garbled, broken, but unmistakably human, whispered through the comms, "Help me." The whisper sent a jolt through the entire crew. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the faint hiss of oxygen through their suits. Did anyone else hear that? One of the scavengers asked, voice low, almost afraid to break the silence. The pilot's hands trembled slightly on the controls. They had heard it too. A human voice. But that was impossible. There weren't supposed to be any humans here. The Exilith didn't take prisoners, and even if they had, no one could survive in a dead ship for this long. One of the scavengers, breathing heavier now, tapped at their suit comms. "Who's there?" they asked. No response. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then another sound. Closer. A rhythmic tapping, like metal against metal. It echoed through the wreck, bouncing off the walls, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. "Something's in here," one of them whispered. The pilot's instincts screamed at them to call the team back. But the human voice, had been desperate. Weak. If there was someone alive in there, they couldn't just leave them. "I'm going in deeper," one of the scavengers said, already pulling themselves forward. Their flashlight cut through the darkness, catching glimpses of flickering screens and shattered bulkheads. The others hesitated, but no one wanted to be the one to say no. The corridor stretched on, narrowing as they moved. The further they went, the worse the damage became. The walls were gouged, not just from weapons fire but from something else long, jagged scratches carved deep into the metal. No one spoke about it. No one wanted to. The tapping sound came again. This time, it was unmistakable. Not random. A pattern. 3 slow knocks. A pause. 3 more. A distress signal. One of the scavengers cursed under their breath. "That's human." "Yeah," someone muttered. "That's what I'm afraid of." They rounded a corner, and the flashlight beam landed on a door half open, its locking mechanism destroyed. The air inside was different. It felt thicker, heavier, as if something had been trapped there for too long. "Help me," the voice whispered again. This time, it was right in front of them. One of the scavengers reached out, hesitated, then grabbed the edge of the door and pulled. The metal groaned, resisting for a moment before giving way. Their lights flooded the small chamber beyond. And there, floating in the weightlessness, was a human.